Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to this Licensing Act subcommittee. It's in respect of an application for a new premises licence for Quinton's Kitchen Limited, Quinton's Cafe, Joe's Golf and Activity Park, Joe's Road, Cornard, Sudbury. The hearing will take the form of a round the table discussion. The applicant will, well, first of all, we'll hear from the licensing officer with the application. The applicant will have his moment to put his case over, and then objectors will have their turn to put their matters forward. There will be opportunities to ask each other questions, but I should remind you that the questions should just be questions and in relation to the representations made here today. The committee will then retire to come to a decision. So moving on to the second item on the agenda, which is the election of chairman. Can I have a nomination for chairman, please?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Sue Carpendale.
Second that.
Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I need to read to you something about our domestic arrangements. The meeting will be broadcast live to YouTube and will be capable of repeated viewing. The entirety of the meeting will be filmed except for confidential or exempt items. If you attend the meeting in person, you will be deemed to have consented to being filmed and that the images and sound recordings could be used for webcasting and training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. So if any of you do not wish to be identified in that manner, it's probably best that you go to the back of the chamber. I'm going to ask the Governance Officer to read the domestic arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room across the corridor. Water is also available outside the room. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building immediately via a fire exit and make your way to the assembly point, which is Ipswich Town Football Ground, at the building behind. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exits, which are at each end of each floor. Do not enter the atrium and do not go down the stairs. If you're in the atrium at the time of the alarm, follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Use stairs, not the lifts. Do not re-enter the building until told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. Thank you.
For absence or substitutions, are there any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests from either of the councillors? No, thank you. Some introductions. I am the chairman for this committee today, and I'm Councillor Sue Carpendale. To my right is
Councillor John Nunn.
And
Councillor Michael Hall.
thank you. And will the officers also please introduce themselves?
Hello, I'm Nigel DeLue. I'm the legal advisor to this subcommittee.
David Price, Licensing Officer.
Catherine Green, Licensing Officer.
Karen Sayer, Governance Officer.
Thank you. Would the applicant please introduce himself? Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Martin and I'm the applicant.
Right, thank you. Have you received the procedure, the report, and all the relevant documents that you need?
Yes, I have.
All right, thank you. Other persons, would you please introduce yourselves? Yes?
John Hills, local resident.
Thank you.
And Kate Alsop, local resident.
Stuart Alsop, local resident.
Michael Evans, local resident.
Or their submissions at this point? No, right, thank you. Sorry, we have to ask. My questions now to the licensing officer. Firstly, have there been any requests from the parties for permission to call witnesses?
No, Chair.
Have the parties indicated they wish to present documentary or other material?
Yes, Chair. I'll take this in two parts, if I may.
Thank you.
I'll start with first the documentation that's been submitted today by one of the other persons. It's then down to the applicant to determine whether to accept or reject it before you get to see it. And then I will deal with the second part, the documentation that has been submitted.
So you're saying
Right.
there's more information or material come through today that no one has seen?
No one has seen it yet. It's down to the applicant and all parties here to accept it before it gets to
Right,
gets to yourself.
so Mr Quinton, you can decide if you want to see this evidence, if you want the committee to see this evidence or not. You can choose.
Presumably it's against the application.
You have the right to accept or not.
Oh, I'd like to decline.
You decline,
Yes.
okay, in which case we do not see it. Second part, David?
Okay, Chair. The second documentation was documentation submitted prior to the hearing date, and if you'd like to go through your decision on each one, Chair.
Right. Would you,
Okay, so we'll start with the summary report of noise. Is it accepted or rejected?
the summary report on noise, which one specifically are you referring to?
Was submitted by the applicant.
Was this the decibel report? And some paragraphs to it. I think no, we do not accept that. It is it's not regarded as something we can validate.
Thank you, Chair. And the letters of support also submitted by the applicant.
No, but the applicant can refer to those as hearsay if he wishes in his own submission.
Thank you, Chair. There was a recording submitted by one of the objectors.
We find that we can't accept that.
Thank you, Chair. There was an additional paragraph that I submitted to yourselves on noise travel.
And again, we cannot accept that.
And lastly, Chair, there were photographs submitted by one of the objectors.
They have been seen, but we cannot accept them for the hearing.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Quinton, how long do you think you will need to make your case? Do you like to give us an indication of timing?
Yeah, I'd say about 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. Can I take it that you are objecting to the application before of you? Have you appointed a spokesperson to speak for you?
I'm just speaking on behalf of myself and the Residents Association.
Right. So are you kind of different groups of people who are objecting?
We are direct neighbours
Okay.
of the activity park, so we feel we have a voice in itself.
Well, in fairness to the applicant, we would normally allow the objectors the same amount of time that the applicant has to make a case. I could be a little lenient on that, but I would ask you please to be very brief. It would be preferable if you could appoint a spokesperson, but if you all want to speak, you can really only have 2 or 3 minutes each.
Sorry, that wasn't what we've been told originally, so this is a bit of a shock.
Ask them how long they do need.
Well, how long do you think you do need?
With all due respect, the paperwork we got asked us how much time we would expect to need. Obviously, what we don't know is whether that included any reply, or but I put down, for instance, 15 minutes. It might be 10. It may be more, and that's the question we were answering within the response to yourselves. Not that our time was limited by the time given to the applicant.
It doesn't, any questions that you might be asking doesn't come out of time that we can give you. But if you all wanted a quarter of an hour, that would make this a very lengthy process.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I mean, the term I know is used a lot within the proceedings is, you know, justice must be done and justice must be seen to be done. I mean, I will condense as much as I can, and if, of course, anything said by my colleagues is repeating what I would say, then I wouldn't obviously ask the same question.
Indeed, just bear with me a moment.
Chair, in accordance with regulations, we must be fair to all parties and there must be the same timings.
Yes, would you like to just confirm that from the legal perspective?
Yes, I mean, fairness is the overall factor in this matter. However, it is not reasonable to hear the same objections over and over again. The general consensus of the written representations relates to more or less the same things. I think it's reasonable. We don't have to have exactly the same amount of time, but we have to be reasonable and keep these meetings as succinct and to the point as possible. We don't have a strict regime that we will cut you off at the very death, but I think it's reasonable to make sure that you keep to the point and don't have an extortionate amount of time compared to the applicant. So it's really the chair's discretion as to if she thinks after the first representation someone else is repeating the same things, and that's unnecessary because they have heard it and they've taken that on board. So you may be asked to wind up unless you have any other matters to raise.
So I think I'll let you choose who to go first. If you bear in mind what we're saying about time, it may be that if others, I will let you all speak, but if you do, I may cut you short if I think this is going on too long or you're repeating. All right? So would you like to decide amongst you who wants to speak first?
Can I just say, I really come here as an observer, because I was my property was damaged and vandalised, so if there was any allegations made against me, I wanted to be able to refute them.
Okay, thank you for that.
That
Okay, we have read the written submissions. So, Mr. Evans, you want to go first? Would you
We can take the seat now as you're going to go first,
do
but
sit.
you won't be speaking just yet. So.
Yes, and when the time comes, you will need to press the silver button on the right that's in front of you. Okay, so that was really just to sort out the timings. We'll now go into the hearing itself, and first of all, I'm going to ask the licensing officer to summarise the matter under consideration.
Thank you, Chair. I will bounce around from the officer's report, so bear with me. This hearing is to determine an application made for the grant of a new premises licence made under Section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003 for Quinton's Kitchen Limited in relation to the premises of Quinton's Cafe at Joe's Golf and Activity Park. The application was received by the Licensing Authority on the 2nd of May 2019, and a copy of this is attached to the report as Appendix A. The application made has been subject to the statutory consultation period as prescribed by regulation. The notices advertised the application have been displayed at the premises and published within the West Suffolk Mercury. The information provided with the application outlines that the sale of and supply of alcohol for consumption on the premises only, recorded music both indoors and outdoors, and live music both indoors and outdoors are proposed as part of a cafe located on the golfing range. Full details of the proposed activities, timings and steps proposed in the operating schedule are contained within the application form also attached to this report as Appendix A. A hearing is necessary to determine the application following receipt of relevant representations which have not been withdrawn. The Licensing Authority must carry out its functions under the Act with a view to promoting licensing objectives, which are stated below. In carrying out its licensing functions, the Licensing Authority must have regard to its statement of licensing policy published under Section 5 of the Act and any guidance issued by the Secretary of State under Section 182. Where revisions are made to legislation or guidance issued by the Secretary of State, there may be a period of time when the local statement of licensing policy is inconsistent with these revisions. In these circumstances, the Licensing Authority will have regard and give appropriate weight to the relevant changes, guidance and its own statement of licensing policy. The subcommittee will be also aware of Human Rights Act 1998 considerations, specifically Article 6 for the applicant and Articles 8 and 1 of Protocol 1 for those raising representations when determining applications for the grant of a new licence. Section 1.9 of the Council Statement of Licensing Policy guides that the licensing process can only seek to control those measures within the control of the licensee or certificate holder. Licensing law is not a mechanism for the general control of antisocial behaviour by individuals once they are away from such premises and beyond the direct control of the licence holder, nor is it a cure-all for the community problems. If the licence holder has taken all appropriate steps to promote licensing objectives whilst carrying out an authorised licensable activity, and there is no causal link established between problems issued in the locality and specific premises, then it is unlikely that the licensing process are the mechanism to address them. Public nuisance is given its statutory meaning in many pieces of legislation. However, under the Licensing Act 2003, it is not narrowly defined and retains its broad common law meaning. Representations that the Licensing Authority has received. We have received no representation from any responsible authority under the Act. However, the Environmental Health, as a responsible authority under the Act, have undertaken mediation on their areas of concern, and the outcome of their mediation is attached as an addendum to this report. There have been 11 representations received by other persons, and these are attached as Appendix B to this report. Members of the subcommittee will be aware of the statutory guidance at paragraphs 14.64 and 14.65, which states that planning and licensing are different regimes and neither are bounded by the other's decision. There are circumstances when a condition of planning permission, a terminal hour has been set for the use of the premises for commercial purposes. Where these hours are different from the licensing hours, the applicant must observe the earlier closing time. Premises operating in breach of their planning permission would be liable for prosecution under planning law. The subcommittee must, having regard to representations made, take such other steps, if any, as it considers appropriate for the promotion of licensing objectives. And these are to grant the licence subject to conditions which are consistent with the operating schedule accompanying the application, modified to such an extent as the authority considers appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, and subject to any mandatory conditions which must be included in the licence. Or 2, to exclude from the scope of the licence any licensable activities to which the application relates. 3, to refuse to specify a person in the licence as a premises supervisor, or 4, to reject the application. For these purposes, conditions of the licence are modified if any of them are altered or omitted, or any new condition is added, and any party aggrieved by decision of the licensing authority in respect of this application has a statutory right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court, and that concludes the officer's report.
Thank you. Mr. Quinton, do you have any questions of the licensing officer?
No, I do not.
No. Would you like to ask any questions of the licensing officer? No? All right, thank you. Do we have any questions for the licensing officer? No? All right, thank you. Mr. Quinton, would you like to present your case to us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I took over the running of this cafe, now known as Quinton's, in December 2018. The owner of the golf site, Vanessa, has kindly given me the opportunity to run my own business, which is brilliant. I'd just like to take the time to point out that I'm nothing to do with Vanessa. We're completely separate legal entities. And I feel that, unfortunately, I've perhaps been tarred with the same brush of previous behaviour that Vanessa may or may not have. There's a bit of history between the locals and Vanessa. I just want to make it clear that that's nothing to do with me. Vanessa Woodward. Yeah, so she's the owner of the golf course. itself. I think the biggest problem with, well, the biggest reason for the representations is the hours of the licence. I just want to take this opportunity to assure everyone that my cafe opening hours will remain as they are, which is 9 till 5. The licensing hours till 10:30 was, I include that in the application to cover me for any one-off events that may or may not occur going forwards. To date, I've had 3 events that are all done under temporary event notices. They're all filed in the correct way, and there were no representations made by the local authorities. 2 of those events were during the day. One of those was in the evening. In my opinion, all 3 of them went very well. The event on the 15th of June, which was the evening, I was conducting a perimeter check, as I was doing every hour. The music of the evening was turned up at about 9:45 once everyone had finished eating the barbecue. On my perimeter walk with my mother-in-law at 10 o'clock, we decided that the music volume was too loud, and then on our way back to inform the DJ to turn the music down, we were met with a resident who is here today, who expressed the same concern that the music was too loud. I informed the resident that we agreed and we were on our way back to turn the music down, which we duly did. Following that, I heard no further objections or complaints on that evening, and I think that this demonstrates that I am able to uphold what's in the licence application with regards to the objectives and with the further objectives that were suggested by the Environmental Protection Team. I think there's a concern that perhaps the locals believe I do not care about the noise levels, which is, it's hurtful, but I do understand, and I do understand why they have concerns. I would just like to take this time to point out that we were approached by a modified car group to hold a car meet on our site. The provisional sort of numbers, but you're looking at sort of 100 to 200 cars wanting to come onto the site, all willing to pay £5 a head. So from a business point of view, that would have been ignoring the potential revenue from food sales, that would have been a nice little earner. Vanessa and I sat down and decided that actually no, that wouldn't be appropriate. It wasn't in keeping with the site, and fundamentally it would have caused far too much noise and nuisance to the local residents, so we kindly declined that. I mean, the events that I intend to hold going forward are, they're going to be in keeping with the site. So we're talking more kids' birthday parties, golf days. We've recently got a golf professional that's started doing some lessons on site, and we're hoping to have some golf days going forward. And we had a retirement party that was quite good. But I'm certainly not wanting to turn it into a festival or a rave venue, because again, it's not in keeping with the site. I mean, you can see on page 33 with the map, we're not necessarily right next to anyone, but we are aware that we are in the countryside and noise does travel. So from my point of view, I'm willing to, I have, in my opinion, done everything in my power to sort of mitigate any noise and nuisance. I did invite the local residents into the cafe to have a conversation over coffee to sort of talk through any concerns or issues that they may have had, and I thought it went quite well. So it was disheartening to see that there were further objections, so representations made since that meeting. I noticed that there is a couple of representations in respect of children being exposed to alcohol. I think one resident implied that after a round of foot golf, children may walk into the cafe and be exposed to people drinking alcohol. I'd like to sort of question what sort of restaurant and pub nowadays that's not the case. As someone who has an experience working in restaurants and pubs, I fully understand the need to have policies in place, such as Challenge 21, and all my staff are already trained to stick to that. Although there are residents here who do object, there are also people in the local community who are all for the cafe sort of growing and getting this alcohol licence. A lot of our golfers especially remark that we're perhaps the only golf course not to have an alcohol licence. I appreciate none of you have seen inside the cafe, but it's a 30 cover, so 30 seats. It's quite a small cafe, and we're very much looking to do the odd bottle of beer and perhaps a glass of wine with roast dinners that we do on Sundays. We're certainly not going to advertise it as a venue to come and have a drink, or it's not going to be a pub. So alcohol is very much ancillary to the food sales. And yeah, as I've said, I'm fully aware of my responsibilities under the licensing objectives, and I will do everything I can within my power to uphold them. And I'm fully aware that should the licence be granted today, I'm fully aware that it can be taken away as easily as it's been granted. So it's certainly in my best interest to keep the locals happy. And if that's with noise mitigation, which, I mean, as you can see from the additional objectives included by this environmental protection team, I've sort of fully taken on board all the suggestions made by them, and with the view to have a noise management plan going forward. I think that's it from me, really. I'm not here to annoy anyone, basically.
If I just start off, can you give an indication at the moment of the level of activity that is going on at the site?
Its business has grown since December 2018, but it's certainly not as busy as perhaps it could be. We have a good breakfast trade with the builders coming in, and then we have a nice lunchtime trade. Normally starts about 1:45 and ends at 2:30. Business then, it drops off significantly from then, and then it's predominantly golfers that come in the mid-afternoon. We run a couple of evening sessions. Well, our cafe's used on a Tuesday and a Thursday evening for a special needs group who come and use the golf facilities as, just to get them out of the house and get them out of their respite centres. They do a wide range of things from golf to arts and crafts, and they use the cafe free of charge to shelter from the British weather, I suppose.
The business, by what kind of percentage growth would you expect that activity on the site to increase?
To make it viable, it's not going to be a substantial increase. I'm fully aware of the limitations, purely looking at the size of the cafe. If we have a Sunday lunch, I mean, the most people we've served on a Sunday is we had 26 people booked in. This is all Sunday lunch, 12 till 3, and that was just purely from the size of the kitchen that we've got. That was almost maximum capacity for me. So we're not talking hundreds of covers a day. I would certainly like to see it improve. In terms of percentage growth, I can't honestly answer that because the trade is so varied at the moment.
Okay, what about, you were talking about a marquee and hiring it out for events.
Yes.
To what extent is that going to increase the activity on the site?
Including my application, I've got unlimited to 12 events per annum. Mm-hmm. At the moment, we've had a few interested parties who've wanted to hire out for children's parties. Whilst there are 12 events in my licence for the year, I'm fully aware that a lot of those are perhaps going to fall within summer. The cafe is a family-run cafe. I run it with 2 members of staff, so we simply don't have the resources to be doing weekly events. At the moment, it's very much a sort of suck it and see process. Tomorrow, for example, we are hosting the Little Cornard Village Barbecue, which again it's not a money maker for us. All the proceeds are going to the Village Hall Fund, but it's to try and sort of advertise us as a site and to perhaps give something back. Because I live in Little Cornard, so I sort of jumped at the opportunity to host it this year. Going forwards, I don't know. We've had a lot of interest for children's parties who want to do some foot golf and then have a barbecue in the marquee. I mean, the largest party we had was on the 15th, which we had 67 people, and that for me was maximum capacity in the marquee. It was just for comfort for everyone, and actually being able to serve that amount of people, that was.
A lot of the concern is obviously about music and
Yes.
the noise that would generate. The outdoor music, and under what circumstances are you likely to be using outdoor music? And how often?
Depending on the function or the party. My plan going forward is to, in the marquee, the way that it's set up is the music speakers sort of project back into the cafe, so away from the residents, to try and mitigate any sort of noise-related nuisance. To put a number on the amount that we expect, I haven't set myself a limit, if you like, but also as it's such early days, I don't know what the uptake of it's going to be. At the moment, it is a very temporary sort of idea. It was suggested by one of our regular customers who wanted to host her kids' princess theme party, and we thought, all right, give it a go. I don't know. It's not going to be every week because I can't handle that every week. It's a lot of stress and preparation, and during the evening you're always conscious about noise and these perimeter checks. You know, it's great to have, and it's a lot easier to do the ones during the day, and I think that's perhaps a bit more relaxing for me. So the evening ones, I'd certainly want to limit those, and certainly I wouldn't be wanting to have, 18, 19, 20-year-olds for parties, just because, it wasn't too long ago that was me out partying, I suppose, and that's not perhaps what is in keeping with the site or indeed the cafe. And we're trying to go for more of a family sort of thing rather than a late night party venue, because we're not set up for that.
I have a couple of questions about the premises themselves. We've seen a photograph of an untidy, derelict-looking area. How accessible is that to people coming onto the site, especially children? And what are your intentions with it?
Okay, so that is in the far corner of the site. It's next to the car park. So if you sort of visualise, you come into the car park. One end you've got this building which is Vanessa's, not really anything to do with me, and then the rest of the activity park is very much away from it. Vanessa unfortunately has had a string of unreliable building contractors, with both with a special needs centre, who she's wanting to build on the site, and also with this storage shed. So in answer to your question, at the moment there's nothing to stop you from walking over there, but people who have come to the site for golf or to come into the cafe, they have no reason to go to that area.
Okay. Just looking at your map again, and my colleagues may have some questions for you on this also. There's an indication of where the marquee would be. I'm looking at page 33. There's an indication of where alcohol sales and consumption would take place, but then alcohol consumption is identified by a dotted line around the whole of the area. Is it your intention that should also be an area for alcohol consumption?
This was following discussions with the licensing team to allow golfers, if they wanted to take a drink round the golf site with them. That's what that is for. That's perhaps not what... Vanessa's happy with that, so I put it on the application.
But that could be not just golfers, that could also be people coming to an event who decide to have a wander around and take drinks outside.
Yeah, I mean, the actual paddock area is enclosed, and to get through to the golf course, you have to go through 2 gates. I mean, if we've got an event on there, we are mindful of keeping people in the paddock or in the cafe. But yes, I mean, I don't think there's anything to stop them perhaps from venturing out there, regardless of...
We may follow that up later.
Okay.
Questions from my colleagues?
You mentioned very early on Vanessa Woolwood, and you said you were not linked in any way, you're separate entities. And yet you've referred to her a couple of times in one reference at car meet, where you almost referred to the fact you had to get a permission or discuss whether you were going to do it or not. So I'm a little bit confused, and also you just mentioned, Vanessa, just now about the outline area for the alcohol consumption. So can you just clarify, is it a business relationship? Are you responsible for the golf side of the business as well? Are you just responsible for the cafe? To say that you're not together and then refer to her a couple of times just is a bit confusing. So if you could just clarify that point for me, please.
Yeah, of course. So we are completely separate. Vanessa runs the golf course and I run the cafe. With certain events like the car meet, for example, or foot golfers, they come to the site to do an activity, and then I get brought in to discuss food and the catering side of things. So it's not a case of I have any sort of interest in the golf course as such, and vice versa.
Okay, so if Vanessa wanted to run a function, she would approach you with that idea for you to facilitate that?
She would give me their number or email address, and I'll then liaise with them directly.
Just another question. You mentioned challenge 21, but in your application you have got challenge 25. I assume that was just a slip of the tongue, so to speak. It will be challenge 25?
It will be challenge 25.
Months do you estimate that music will be played?
It will certainly be infrequent. Are you talking late at night or just generally during the day? Both. I mean, I can't put a number on it, and I wouldn't want to tie myself to a number, but it's certainly not going to be frequent, and it will, you know, we'll try to be as unimposing and in terms of timing as possible.
Music is only going to be played when there's a marquee event.
Yes, that's correct.
So how many marquee events per month?
Well, my limitation is per annum, which is 12.
So music will only be played 12 times
In a month?
a year?
Yeah, correct, in a year, potentially. Well, it's for events, so whether it be alcohol sales or live or recorded music, there's a potential of 12 times, yes. Outside music, yes. Obviously, I've still got the background music being played in the cafe, but that's purely background music.
You mentioned the meeting that we had early on in May, where we had a subsequent meeting further on in the 31st. One of those things that you mentioned there is that you would talk to the local residents about upcoming events. When it came to June the 15th and you had your TENS event, it was me who came to you in the road, in Joe's Road, and approached you and your mother-in-law. And my question to you then was, why weren't we informed? And that was born from your original statement of that you would talk to us about these events. And your challenge to me was that you didn't have to inform us. It wasn't you didn't need to do that, which was a direct change of attitude to what we thought was quite a acceptable approach. And I just wondered, what is going to be your plan for telling the local residents about these events so we can brace ourselves?
So that is your question?
Yes.
Just for clarification, that the question you asked, I believe, was where were those signs posted? My response was under temporary event notices. There's no public consultation, and it was down to the local authorities. Honestly, the reason that the local residents weren't told about the 15th is I was very aware of the hearing, and I was aware that every resident would likely have objected had they have known in advance. So I wanted to actually sort of test the waters in terms of volume sales, in terms of volume. Of course, going forward, the residents will be aware, but I would like to ask, I've noticed that your property is on the market. Do you think that these questions are more of a concern about the sale of your property?
I don't think that's not a relevant matter for this hearing.
So in answer to your question, going forward, the residents, you know, I do want to work with you guys, and I although I wasn't necessarily around when everything kicked off, if you like, between Vanessa and yourselves, but Vanessa doesn't speak for me, and going forward, I'm not here to upset anyone. It is hurtful, you know, reading the representations, it was hurtful, and I would much rather...
So I think you've answered the question. Thank you.
Make your questions to the applicant on his application, if you would, please.
Could you just clarify, we did then try and hold a meeting with you on the 31st of May, which you cancelled.
So the communication has been there from our side. You cancelled the subsequent meeting. I'd just like that to be on record. Thank you.
Noted. All right.
About the marquee. Thank you. On page 33 of the application, the map shows a large area for the marquee, which is much larger than the actual marquee that is on the site. Is this just laying the ground for future expansion to hold bigger and busier events by marking this as such a large area, and thus potentially bringing more and more traffic, noise, pollution, antisocial behaviour and crime to the area?
Just to respond to the cancelled meeting, when everyone arrived at the site, my wording was, unfortunately the meeting today is cancelled, and then I was asked why, and I said the purpose of the meeting was to try and work with you and to mitigate any objections. I contacted the licensing team and was informed that since that meeting there are objections, and also I heard from the fishermen that you'd asked them to object to the application. So that's unfortunately why that meeting was cancelled. Yeah, so regarding the large blue outline, that is purely where the enclosed paddock is. And at the time of the application, we weren't sure where we were going to put the marquee. It's just like a marquee you put up and put down. So that's an indication as to the paddock. As I've said sort of before, this is very early days for me as a business and for the marquee side of things. My intentions going forward, it's not going to be the sort of venue which is purely for events. First and foremost, it is a golf course and it is a cafe on the golf course. The event side of things, I don't want to grow because I'm not. It wouldn't be in keeping with the site to have, weddings, receptions. So in terms of growth, no.
So I think you've answered the question about the question was about the marquee. So we just switch to that. Thank you.
Direction. We're talking about here public safety. I've paid a visit to the site, and in my experience and knowledge from what Vanessa said, the premises hasn't had a fire risk assessment carried out on it in the two and a half years she's been there. On the evidence of what I viewed in relation to fire extinguishers signage, there isn't any, and fire extinguishers are seen tucked in the corner of the cafe behind some water bottles with no signage. My point for that is, are you fully aware of the regulations you should go under for the regulatory reform fire safety order? And also, has the marquee, which has been sitting outside for a good 18 months, been fireproofed, or do you know if it's fireproofed should an incident occur?
We had a gentleman come out and do a health and safety and fire advisory. I can't remember what it was, but the fire safety side of things is under my lease, covered by Vanessa, so that is Vanessa's responsibility as far as I'm concerned. Again, I'm leasing the marquee, so I can't answer that question in terms of fire safety, but there's no open flames or anything like that near the marquee, so I would expect.
Most fires don't necessarily start from a flame, they start from electrical faults. Yeah.
I do have two questions. If your licence was granted today by the committee, would you be willing to include a condition, either by letter drop or a website, if you have one, to notify residents of any events?
Yes, absolutely. I've got a website in the process, so that could be an ideal platform for that, as well as a letter drop.
And the other one I have, would you...
No.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my intention was to do both of those things.
And the other one I have, would you be willing to provide a telephone number for complaints, if there was any, for an event?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone who attended the meeting in the cafe has my telephone number, and some residents who didn't attend also have received that telephone number already for that reason.
Can you just wait till it's your turn to make a representation? We're just asking questions.
It's coming up in...
safety, if I may. Are you fully aware, and I'm sure you must be, that the area where the marquee is stored is also used for splat ball for children to play in, which is great, don't have a problem, but it's also used very frequently by Vanessa's dogs. I mean, what guarantees are there that an area that is used for children and the public to go to events is going to be on an enclosed area which 2 or 3 dogs are in all day long? And we obviously know the result of what happens when dogs are left on a site. Vanessa keeps them there. I know this is the issue. Unfortunately, Vanessa's not here as the site owner. And these two have got to work together, and it isn't going to work.
No, Chair. Obviously, the owner is separate from the applicant in this hearing.
The splat ball was sold last summer, and the dogs, she puts them in her back garden and walks them around the golf course. Because, yeah, I agree there was a concern about the dogs going near the marquee, but that's sort of been nipped in the bud from the outset.
Yeah, it was just perhaps the Office of Clarification. The gentleman over there raised a concern about fire regulations, etc., which I think the applicant sort of answered, but are they actually relevant to this licensing application?
The fire safety order is obviously a separate piece of legislation and not relevant. However, the applicant must do a fire risk assessment.
Sorry, have we had that?
That's not something that we would get anyway. It would go to the fire service.
So it's not part of this hearing? No.
Not really, because we would be duplicating another primary legislation.
So, would you... Is it a question?
What experience do you have in managing large numbers of persons on licensed premises, and how long have you held your personal licence?
So I worked in the busiest chef and brewer, which is a pub chain, for 3 years, which involved, we used to have private functions there all the time with numbers ranging from 20 to 30 people. That would involve taking of pre-orders and serving them alcohol and ensuring that anyone who appeared under 25 was ID'd accordingly. From that as well, I worked at a more high-end restaurant where functions and weddings were wedding receptions rather, were frequently happening. So I'm comfortable that I've got the experience to manage a much larger scale than what I'm proposing here. My own personal licence was granted 15th of May, 2019. Is that right?
What experience do you have? I'm being the manager, and obviously conflict resolution.
So just to clarify, I was a trainee assistant manager at the pub I mentioned and a restaurant supervisor at the second restaurant I mentioned, where I was frequently having to deal with confrontation and managing of people and guests.
Anyone have any further questions? Yes?
Yes. Children on the site, because the whole site is a licensing area, they should be accompanied by an adult. Is that going to be possible?
I think it's I think it's as possible at this venue as it is at any other licensed venue. So yeah, I think that's certainly as possible at this venue as it is at any other licensed venue. Yes.
Can I just highlight in the operating schedule that under the protection of children from harm, it does say that where events or activities are intended primarily or exclusively for persons over 18, the premises licence holder shall ensure no alcohol is available. There shall, what did I say? Children shall only be permitted in the area of the premises being used for licensed activities or events where accompanied and under the supervision of an adult. So it is in the operating schedule.
And obviously the question you asked, 15-acre or 20-acre site require alcohol consumption over the whole of it. It just seems totally...
So you'll have your chance to make a representation in a minute.
Questions? It's now your turn to make your representation. And bear in mind, please, I don't want to go too long on this because it's not fair to the applicant.
Just say, he actually took just over 6 minutes in his bit, so you can...
Okay. Can you... No, you're fine. Sorry, we just if you keep an eye on the egg timers, because we do this generally in committee, so it's not just you.
Okay. My primary representation is about. We are next door neighbours, but one. Unfortunately, between us is a lake. Now, one of the representations I put forward, and I will refer to, is that there are scientific case studies out there in the wild that say that sound travels further over water. Reasoning behind that is that the air is cooled over a water body, and therefore the sound can travel further. So, in effect, we may as well be next to the Joe's golf range, which is unfortunate because both my wife and I are early risers, and subsequently we go to bed early. Now, and that's weekday and weeknight. On the 15th, we had a sample of what one of these events was going to be when the site was granted a TENS. And to be absolutely honest, we could hear it both inside and outside of our house, clearly. We could tell what song was being played. We could tell whether we liked it or not. When I went up to talk to the licensee applicant about the issue, I met them on the road, and the lady accompanying you said that I should appreciate the music because it's of my era, which it wasn't, I would like to state. And also, surely I couldn't hear that inside my house. Well, actually, I could hear it both inside and outside my house. If that was true, I could only hear it outside. Does that mean I have to stay in my house while you're having events? Which I think that is totally unfair. It also puts me that actually there's that they lived near Bewe's Music Festival, and that's twice or 3 times louder. I totally accept that it's 3 times louder, but that only happens one time a year, and everybody knows about it. So I feel that my objections to not only the noise which comes through, but the increased traffic, the danger to the wildlife. I've personally had to scoop up ducklings off the side of the road this week, not necessarily towards the golf range, but this is only get worse. So I would really, really appreciate the fact that we are close neighbours. We can hear everything, even the dogs barking at the golf range. So let alone music, and that are my clear viewpoint of why I really do not want late night events happening at that golf range.
Sorry, Chair. If you allow the applicant to ask any questions of that one first, or did you want to come back to it? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say is that I have concerns about the working practices of the management that he's doing on the licence part against the golf centre. Bearing in mind, there is a planning application which has been passed to build a respite centre for 6 people or more and their carers to sleep overnight, which nobody objected against that. We don't have that problem. But please, where's the management conflict here? You've got one wants to play music late into the evening, and somebody else, just 30, 40 yards away on the same site, wants to have a respite centre. And there seems to be some confusion with that, which we haven't had an answer for. Secondly, one has got to be concerned that following rules and regulations, we all have to do it. But one of them things was that you can't advertise to bring people to the site. It's for golf people only in the cafe. Yet signs have gone up on the A134, on adjacent signage. The brown signage at the top of Joe's Road, signs were screwed through that sign to advertise that the CAF was on site. And there were some on electrical poles and telegraph poles along Joe's Road. All things which are slight small breaches, but it does suggest, is this a pattern? And finally, all I would ask the committee is to consider, I'm sure you are aware of a case of East Lindsley District Council and Abba Hasnif in relation to crime and what drinking establishments can do, and that was in 2016. And another case, stated case, was an application at the Hope and Glory Public House via the City of Westminster, where it illustrates that licensed premises and activities that take place in these premises exist in a dynamic environment and should not be looked at entirely in isolation, which is basically saying you should look at the community. How is it affecting the community? Not just how is it going to affect somebody a minute away. And my final question is, we all know there's been 11 representations, or myself working for the Residents Association. What we are not aware of is how many supporting letters there were, and in fact, where are them supporting people? They live in half a mile, 3 miles away. Are they family members that are supporting it? Are they actually partners to the business that are supporting it? I think that really matters. That's my piece.
Isn't included in the timing, but what I would like to say relates to crimes and incidents that have happened in the past, but have happened in the recent past since Martin has been at the site. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to read through what I wrote, because I think it's really important to get a background of how the residents actually feel and the strain and the stress they're living under because of the owner of the site, but also because of this application. They are intertwined, however much Martin would like to think they're not. They absolutely are. And if I don't read this statement, there's nothing really else I can add to what Stuart and John have said.
I'm going to advise the committee that they will hear your statement. I will give advice on what weight that they should give it in regarding to incidents that you're going to refer to.
Okay. As you are aware, or as you may not be aware, one resident has had his car and garage door vandalised with the C word on his car bonnet and the word cafe and an arrow pointing in the direction of your cafe, Martin, sprayed onto his garage door. Martin stated to myself and John Hills that he believed the resident was responsible for removing signs that were advertising the cafe, and that Vanessa Rayworth, who owns the site, stated that it could have been one of the golf range and/or cafe customers exacting revenge, as she had told them that this resident had objected to her planning and was responsible for moving the cafe signs. So far, no evidence has been produced to prove this resident did remove these signs, although Martin told us that they were behind the resident's garage and that there were photographs of them. Vanessa Rayworth stated there was a video of the resident removing the signs, but nobody has ever seen any of this. I believe your accusations are wholly unfounded, and that you are, by saying and accusing this resident of doing these things, partially responsible for what happened to his car and garage door. As a consequence of what happened to the resident's car and garage door being vandalised, many residents have been too scared to report any breaches or issues at the site, and were too scared to object to the licensing application for fear of retaliation. Many who did object did so anonymously and are too scared to attend this meeting. This is an incredibly serious issue for residents who feel their safety is at risk and are scared of repercussions. Stuart's already mentioned the comments that the person we believe to be Anne Johnson made to him. Although they may appear to be just throwaway comments, to us, that's actually really patronising and dismissive. It comes across as passive-aggressive and bullying, and intimidation and harassment like that is just totally unacceptable. And we have now been barred from the site, so we can't even go and speak to them about any of this.
Okay, thank you. There's quite a bit of information in that. What I would say that the subcommittee are not aware of any accusations, and they're not something that they are here to consider. The application is for a premises licence, and the basis of the granting of that premises licence is that it does not impinge on one of the 4 licensing objectives. They have to work on the evidence that's been provided. I'm sure that we understand that there's a lot of history here, but I must reiterate that the licensing subcommittee can only consider what is proportionate and relevant information on the balance of probabilities, and that's how they will make their decision. I would advise them not to put too much weight on the history, although I do know it's important to you, but in respect of this application, I will be asking them to focus their minds on the licensing objectives and how the application will impinge on that. Okay. Before you, I'm sure you have questions, but I'd just like to say now that you have a chance to sum up and address some of the things that have been said at the end. So if any questions now, if they can just be questions rather than coming back at things, because you will have an opportunity to say that. Okay.
First opportunity to ask questions of what has been said by you as objectors. Would you like to? You don't have to, but.
I think anything that I would perhaps want to ask or talk with isn't relevant to the licensing objective, so at this moment I don't have any further questions.
All right, and as you just heard, you do have the opportunity at the end to sum up.
Yeah, I'll use that time.
Thank you. Licensing officer, any questions?
No, Chair, I don't have any questions.
My colleagues?
No, Chair.
Just one small thing again, the clarification on the noise, it just offers us, is that part of this application, about the environmental side and the noise impact that this may cause?
Obviously, Councillor, obviously protection of public nuisance is a relevant factor. The applicant has stated steps proposed to that he's willing to deal with public nuisance, and then the rest is yours to deal with.
Thank you.
If no one has any further questions at this point, we come to the stage where I'll ask the licensing officer to give a closing statement to summarise any points which need clarity where necessary. So over to you, David.
Chair, well, I will be brief. Obviously, you have the 4 licensing objectives: the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. In making your decision today, you have your recommendations at (2.1) of the officer's report, and you've listened to the evidence from both parties, and you will make your decision accordingly.
Would you like to make a closing statement?
Yes. So as I've already said, I've sort of explained my intentions, everything going forward, but I just really want to hit home on the point that I'm just trying to run a business, and I genuinely do not want to upset any local residents. Now, I know it's not strictly relevant, but for what happened to Mr. Evans's property, there is no excuse for that, and I'd just like to take this time to assure you that I had nothing to do with that. No, but I just, excuse me. I don't want to turn the venue into a rave city or festival venue. It's supposed to be, like I said, in keeping with the site, and I fully appreciate that if in 6 months' time, if it isn't working, it's not working. And I, more than anything, just want to be given the chance and the opportunity to show that I am a responsible individual. I do take on board comments from the residents, and I am here. My business is food and making people happy and all those cliches, and I certainly take any other comments or anything else I can do on board. I'm sorry that you're not allowed on the site, but unfortunately out of my hands, because again, Vanessa, but she's not here. Just on the point of the lake, this was a point I did raise to the Environmental Protection about how noise travels over water and etc. I was advised that wasn't a concern. Yeah, I mean, I'll probably ramble for ages. I just want to be given a chance to show that I can run a business and serve alcohol without, you know, any negative impact on the residents, and I believe I can do that. Thank you.
I now need to read out a further statement. On the basis that the subcommittee considers that the public interest in excluding the public outweighs the public interest in its deliberation being held in public, it is resolved that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for item 13 on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12 of the Act, on the grounds set out in Regulation 14(2) of the Licensing Act 2003, Hearings, Regulation 2005. So at this point, I need someone to second that motion, please.
I'll second that motion, Chair.
Thank you. And we will now, I would say we would retire, but I think we're going to ask you to retire, as we will stay here and deliberate, and we'll call you back when we have a decision for you. Thank you. Thank you and welcome back. We have come to a decision and I'm going to ask Mr. Liu, our legal advisor, to read the decision to you and to add any other conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The subcommittee have considered everything that's been put before them today, written and verbal, and they do realise that there is a history between the residents and the site, but they've had to consider the objectives of the licensing committee, the Licensing Act, and in making those considerations, they have decided to grant the licence subject to conditions which are consistent with the operating schedule accompanying the application, but also modified to such an extent as the authority considers it appropriate for the promotion of licensing objectives. Those modifications come in the form of the 4 additional conditions that were agreed with the Senior Environmental Health Protection Officer, together with a further condition that the premises licence holder will publish notice of events on the website and by letter drop to the residential premises on Joe's Road. Such notification will include a phone number for contact for the public, the premises licence holder or the person responsible for the event. That needs finalising because we're not sure how far Joe's Road goes. Obviously, it needs to be extended only to those that are affected. So perhaps if it could be agreed as to how far those will go. Can you wait a minute? I just need to finish this. There is also a variation to the extent of consumption of alcohol on the site. Again, this will need to be finalised by resubmission of a plan, but it's decided by the subcommittee that the area of the golf course should be excluded from the consumption, and that consumption of the alcohol should be restricted to the cafe area and to the paddock area in which the marquee is situated. And the reason for this is that subcommittee feel that it's difficult to monitor people drinking alcohol further afield using the golf course. There is a right of appeal to this decision. The applicant and any person who's made a representation to the subcommittee can appeal against the decision or against any condition imposed on the application, on the licence, and that application should be made to the Magistrates Court within 21 days from the date that the decision notice is issued. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you wish to ask something?
No, it was to point out that the gentleman stated that a letter drop must be done along Joe's Road. Sheepshead Hill, the people who live in Sheepshead Hill, which is off Joe's, are members of the Residents Association also and can be affected. So it's not just Joe's Road, there is Sheepshead Hill as well.
Or perhaps that could be finalised with the licensing officer.
Yes, if we actually decide who is most likely to be affected, those in the immediate vicinity. I think at some point I saw that there were 35 homes nearby, but we will look at the properties that are most likely to be affected by noise. Yes.
The owner of Abbas Hall has written a letter of objection because he can hear the music.
And is that the property that we see on its own opposite the range, or it's a different one? Okay, no.
No,
it's a listed building.
Right. Okay, we'll make sure that we follow up on those particular points. So that's the hall, the listed building, and we'll look at those properties that are affected. Okay, are we done? Thank you very much for attending, and I'll now close the meeting.